Well, here we are, another week at Retropower, another episode of Retropower Uncut. Sounds like the beginning of a story. It's a busy one as usual. We've been doing quite a bit on Utah. We've been cracking on with the door builds a bit more. Obviously, there's quite a lot of work involved in those. James has been carrying on working on the central locking mechanisms in the doors to enable those to work with the remaining parts of the original Jaguar locking mechanisms, which isn't a particularly straightforward task. So he's been working on with that, making sure that that operates on all the doors. There's been various problems with trying to get the linkages to operate and not go over centre in the space available, and also still allow the original manual mechanisms to work as they should. Because of the way the mechanisms were designed, obviously they were never really designed with a view of having central locking in the car when it was done originally. So the mechanisms weren't designed with that in mind. So there's been a fair bit of redesign work on those to enable that to function. But I believe we're now at the stage where all that does work. All the doors unlock and lock from both central locking and from the mechanical mechanisms. As far as I'm aware, that's certainly where I think we're at on it. So he's met with success on that. It's been a hard slog, but he's met with success on that. And then he's now moved on to these armrests that we 3D printed. These have got to fit onto an angled pin in the door. Basically, we wanted them to sit with. These are going to be trimmed in leather. But we wanted them to sit so that there were no visible fasteners on them. So we had to come up with a way that was robust enough to fit them to the door so that they can withstand the door being used to slam the door over lots and lots of cycles, and not damage the door or themselves, and feel solid and nice to use. But without any visible fixings and without access to an injection moulding machine to make neat little clicking covers, which don't really work particularly well with a leather trim anyway. So we've decided to use some angled pins that go into the armrest from underneath, and then a countersunk bolt going into a counterbore that basically pulls the armrest up onto the angled pin, so that the bolts are hidden underneath. There'll be a stainless bolt in from underneath. They're all hidden, and that the armrest, the actual forces are taken by some 16mm diameter pins that will be welded to base plates that are then bolted into the doors. The tricky bit is getting the alignment of the base plates into the doors, because that wasn't designed at the earlier stages of the project, so we've got to actually get those located into the doors accurately now. It's a little bit of a fiddly job. So going from one fiddly job to another, James is now onto those. So that's his task of the next couple of days or so, because it's going to take a little while to do those. So that's what he's moved on to now. In the meantime, Dean from Trimworks upstairs has popped down, and he's been cracking on with templating carpets and getting the non-seat related parts of the interior in hand. So he's been doing templating work for the carpets and and how many sections they've got to be done in and all that sort of stuff. So he's pretty much getting there, I believe, with that. He's certainly been beavering away on his knees, crawling around the car quite a lot with various bits of paper with lots of pen lines on. So I think he's getting fairly well forward with the carpet templating now. And that pretty much brings us to where we're at on Utah. I think everything else I can see was covered last week, so that's pretty much where we are on that. In the meantime, to my left, the Stratos, we've been doing a little bit more work on that. Trev's been busy with the dash, which is another fiddly job week in the assembly area. Trev's been on with the dash in that, which sounds simple, but it isn't. I think we mentioned it last week, because there were little bits being mentioned last week on the dash. He's been working on the speakers, which sounds, again, simple, but they fit to a frame that bolts into the car, and that frame also actually locates the dashboard to avoid too many visible fasteners. So getting those located into their frames, getting all the wiring positioned, all the wiring secured, getting the vent feed pipes all positioned and secured in the correct positions and the vents installed, getting the wiring for the heated screen through and to under the dash, and the plugs secured for that, and the wiring secured on the routing for that. And basically, it's just quite a large slog of getting all the audio head unit, getting that in position, getting that mounted, because that mounts sort of it's mounted through the dash but not to the dash, so he's been cracking on with that as well. And again, it's all quite fiddly, making all that fit in the space. All the brackets are done, but it's still quite challenging to get it all mounted up. It's not something you want to be having to take apart too often, because it's all quite a tricky challenge to get into place. There's not a lot of space in these cars. Seems to be another theme with vehicles we're working on around the workshop at the moment. There's not an awful lot of space to get all the components in. So he's been busily working on getting all that into the space available. I think that's not understating what he's been doing on that. Yeah, it's basically just there's tweeters as well in the dash. I hadn't noticed those. The main speakers, but also the tweeters, getting those positioned, the bracketry sorted for those, just getting everything positioned for the final time, and all the wiring located for the final time. So then it doesn't need moving after, once we get onto road testing and all the myriad of ongoing tasks associated with this car, because obviously this has got to go through an IVA test as well. There's a load more work there. Hopefully none of that should then need touching though after this stage. That's in and to stay in. There's various other bits of the car that have got to be various other changes have got to be made, and little tweaks along the way, but that area should be able to go together and now stay together and not need the time-consuming dismantling for anything else. So that's where we're at with that. I think that sums up the bulk of things that are going on in the assembly area. I can touch on something else because it's just over there. Now we'll pick that up when we go through. There's the Chevette engine, but we'll bring that in when we go through next door. I'll wander through. I've just seen it over there. But, I imagine Jamie will have some footage, so we'll talk about that when we're through here. Wandering along. Have a drink of coffee because I seem to be dehydrated now. I've done most of a day without a drink. So here, find me by the Jensen, which is where I seem to have been most of the week. We've made some pretty good progress this week, and finally just this afternoon actually. Annoyingly, Tom's actually not here today. He's off today. He would have probably quite liked to have been here just for us getting the body on, because it's the culmination of his work on the body sides and all the rear end of the car to get us to the point we're at now with dropping the body back on. There's a few tweaks needed and a few fiddles needed, but it loosely fits. It's not quite as straightforward as that, but it pretty much fits. The work that's gone on this week is the rear end of the car. There was a big hole, as you may recall from last week. There was a big hole at the front of the boot area where I'd cut some material out when I did the rear suspension fit, and I hadn't put anything back in there yet because we were still not quite sure on the space for the fuel tank. So Tom and I sort of had a bit of a heads together at the beginning of the week on working out how to fill that area in with reasonable elegance, neatly, with the correct structural strength where it was needed, leaving enough space for the fuel tank of the right capacity, leaving enough space underneath for good clearance on the exhaust, and for probably most importantly, semi-reasonable access to get to the nuts on the rear suspension mounting bolts, which are actually quite difficult to get at on this car, full stop. It's not a job that I relish doing too often, but hopefully won't need doing too often. The rear bush mounting bolts, there's 8 of them on the car, and they're not the easiest to get at. But anyway, making some space to get at those was part of the challenge in doing the boot floor area. But we came up with a plan. Tom did some paper templates. He then transferred those to a bit of sort of offcut of old 22 gauge steel, just so we could bend it up and just check that it was about the right shape, which it was. Then we took the lines off that, converted it onto CAD, drew it up on CAD, plasmaed the blanks out, folded them, put them in. He's welded them in. He then sketched up the boot floor, got the basic dimensions for the actual folded main section of the boot floor. Drew that up on CAD, chopped that out on the plasma, folded that. He stitch welded all that in, so that's all done. In the meantime, I was tinkering on with the HVAC unit. I've finished off the fabrication of the bulkhead for the air feed to the HVAC unit, which involved fitting it and unfitting it about 10 times, but that's now in. It's not, obviously it will be coming out again, but it can now stay in there. It's now bolted in. It bolts in, the air feed's done with a little rubber seal onto the fan intake. Also, at the beginning of the week, very tail end of last week, and then the beginning of this week, I came up with a design for the steering column mounts. We're using we probably mentioned it last week. We're using a telescope adjustable XJ40 steering column. I've remade the bracketry that actually goes onto the top of the column. I've cut that down. It wasn't quite the right shape really for what I wanted, so I've cut that bracket down, remade that bracket, and then mounted it in a pair of shear bolts that are in shear when that column's mounted. Fabricated drew it up on CAD, CNC the sections out, and then welded in the column mount off the back of the plenum bulkhead structure. We've still got to do the lower bracket on the column, but that's getting there now. That all clears, and then Tom's also refabricated, I think it was actually shown on the end of the last video, he's just refabricated a bit of bulkhead to give us clearance on the UJ on the steering column, because originally on the Jensen, the steering column was actually offset very slightly left. We wanted it centered on the driver's seat, so we've just modified the bulkhead a little bit to bring the UJ across a hair, just so it is centered on the driver's seat. Next stage in that area is going to be doing the pedal box. We're going to change the pedal box slightly so that we can use readily available master cylinder and servo. We're not quite set on what we're using there yet, but we're going to just refabricate that so it's a modern servo, modern master cylinder, then it's all just easy off the shelf if anything ever goes wrong. So we've got to do that. Loads of bits of finishing off in the bulkhead area. That's all done. What have I missed? What have I missed? I think that's probably most of the stuff there. Then today we've put I've had a little fettle around with the body sides, tidied up a couple of bits and bobs that needed either tweaking or the odd weld and grinding and things like that, just to get clearance. Put those on, bolted them on, and got them all positioned as accurate as I think they can be. It's very difficult working on cars like this where the accuracy wasn't amazing to start with, working out what inaccuracy is inherent and what inaccuracy is generated. But I'm pretty confident I got it to the inherent inaccuracy level rather than the generated by us inaccuracy level. So we've got the body sides on. I've got them at the same angle at the top, which I've had to take a bit of a stab in the dark, but it looks about right now. I've put the body on. I figured they were around 8 degrees, and I think they are looking at it now. And then we've picked the body up. We've cut a section out the front here just to clear the new bulkhead because this is being remade. And then we've dropped that on, and it's pretty much a fit. It's not so good here, but I think that's because of this previous crash damage here. I think when this was remade, they possibly remade it to a door line that was wrong, because looking at it now, it curves forward at the bottom, which it shouldn't do. So I'm pretty sure that bit of fiberglass there is actually wrong, which is probably why that bit doesn't fit. The rest, with the exception of a little bit of a tweak on the front pillar, is actually very good. All fits really well. So happy with all that. There's more to do on the HVAC in terms of that it needs another mount, and it needs the vent routings all sorting, and then we've got some adapters to make for the pipe work going to the HVAC unit. To be able to connect the pipework up to it, because we want to use threaded fittings inside the car, no clip-on or push-on type fittings, because if we have a leak there, it's horrendous because we've got to strip half the car apart to get at it. So I only want threaded fittings that we can thread seal, and cone type fittings, basically the AN type fittings, JIC fittings that seal on a 60-degree cone, but then we'll also thread seal the threads when we do them up, so there's literally no chance of leaks in there. Another thing, just looking at that, I drew up on Tuesday, and 3D printed in the carbon fibre reinforced PETG, an adapter that basically spaces the air intake fan for the HVAC unit 60mm off the unit. Problem with those vintage air units is in the original application they're okay, just about, to get at the unions on. As soon as you fit them in an application where they're in a slightly different orientation versus the surrounding metalwork, you usually can't get at the unions. So I've spaced the fan off, which then gives us a lot more access to the unions. It makes the unit a bit wider, but that's not a problem. We've got the width. It's just that you can't actually get at the pipes with the fan right against the side of the unit. So I've spaced it off, and that now means we've got a bit more space to play with to get the pipes off the unit and then to the bulkhead section that you saw last week, where the 2 heater pipes and the 2 aircon pipes go through the bulkhead. So yeah, next week we're going to carry on with a few bits of working around the body, make sure that we were happy with the fits. We'll then put the door frames in, bolt the door frames into the apertures, check that we've got the right sort of fit as best we can with the frames. Obviously, when they've got no skins on, you can't actually check it fully because the skin forms some of the edge. But we can check that everything looks correct and that the spacing is concentric to the aperture. Check that we're happy with that. Then drill any more mounting holes and finish off any other mounting points for the body. Temporarily locate and pin the body to the body sides and finish off any edges that we need to do to get everything sitting correct. And then really the next stage will be building all the front end up then, getting all the front body work on so we can finish off the support structures on the front. And then we're not a million miles away from starting to look at the final body. In parallel, we'll be looking at the interior stuff, so anything metalwork affecting or structure affecting or significant engineering wise on the interior, mainly dash assembly, in tandem with working on the bodywork. We need to get that underway because there's a big, I won't do any big announcements now, but the bodywork is going to be significantly altered. So watch this space on that one. There'll be a lot to watch. So moving on from that, on that bombshell, hiding behind the welding screen just over there is the Morris Minor. Scott's been working on that. Sloggy jobs, as we mentioned, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, and I think Cal also mentioned last week. Tricky jobs, lots of making things fit, lots of quart in a pint pot sort of jobs. And Scott's been on with making the covers and the speaker mount. The car's having a stereo, nothing sort of crazy, but just a reasonably nice sound installation in it, so that on a long journey you can listen to some music while driving. And the speakers for that, the mountings for the speakers are also being used to mount some shields in the back, which cover up the remote servo unit and the battery compartment from the inside of the car. So Scott's been shaping those covers in aluminium to fit in, and it's a pretty awkward shape he's got to shape them into. It's been a bit of a battle. It's quite a tricky shape. So we have a 3D scanner. If anybody just happens to want to give us a 3D scanner, that would be really, it's where a nice structured light scan to pick up all the data points to give us, to be able to draw those covers would speed the job up so much, because there's no real straight edges in the space he's trying to, he could blame me for not designing the chassis a little bit easier to panel that area in from, but it is a bit of a challenge. It's quite a tricky shape. He's about there now, but it has been quite a battle. And he's also then made the mounts for the speakers, which are then going to carry the mounts for those covers. He's roughed them out as a bit of a trial, confirmed they were okay, and then he's drawn them up. Scott's just starting to get slightly up to speed on CAD himself now. He's using Fusion here as well, and he's just done the basic drawing for that, and then I've helped him just do some tweaks on it. But he's getting up to speed on CAD now. He's drawn those up, CNC plasma cut these brackets, and then got them folded and got them welded in, so they're all in the car now as well. So that's coming on quite well. So just basically more of the same for the next week on that. There'll be more of the fiddly, making stuff fit in the space available jobs. So watch this space on that one. And then I suppose Land Cruiser, we've or Golf VR6 apparently. This week's grill. We had a meeting early on in the week on the Land Cruiser project. My brother and I and Adam had a get together so that we could all be sort of on the same page with all the ideas, and basically a brainstorming session really, because we've got pretty good ideas on some of it. Our customers got very good ideas on some of it, and then there are other areas where none of us have got particularly good ideas. So we're putting all of our ideas together to come up with a plan, which we've got a pretty solid plan now. We've got engine here, gearbox, a used transmission on its way here, on the grounds that we can get a new one from Toyota, but it was extremely expensive, and we wanted to do the mock-up operation with a used one first. As it is, we may rebuild the used one yet. There's not a solid plan on that. We may yet rebuild the used one, but that's on its way here as well. We've got a fairly good plan on the interior. The loose plan is there's nothing too wild happening to it. Basically, the design is quite iconic. It's not a design we really want to make too many changes to. It's just, I think Cal's mentioned it in a previous video, but we don't want to do any really wild changes. I think people were a bit nervous reading some of the comments on previous videos that we were going to go mad and completely take it away from what it used to be. That's not the idea at all with this. It's going to be pretty sympathetic by our standards, because it is such an iconic vehicle, and there are so many things that kind of make it what it is, that whenever you look over the car and look for things to improve, a lot of the time with this, actually, they were pretty good to start with. So a lot of the changes are going to be, relatively speaking, in our terms at least, subtle. So again, watch this space on that. But yeah, we had a pretty good meeting where we've got a lot of plans. Everything's down on paper. We've appraised our customer of those plans, and he's on the same page as us. So yeah, we're pretty much ready to start getting into some work on this. Really though, we're also juggling a number of other projects at the same time. So we don't want to throw everything into this until we're at the position where we can have somebody on it full time. There are some jobs we'll get in hand in the meantime, but the main push on it will be as soon as one of the other vehicles has left the area we're in at the moment, which is very imminent. So yeah, that'll be forging forward. And I'll walk through here past some Jensen doors to the Chevette, which we are pressing on with at the moment. Gaz has started bodywork operations on it again now, restarted bodywork operations on it again. Now he's got the shell to work on. Steve's now with us. He's helping Gaz working on this. They're cracking on. They're just doing the rough shaping of everywhere that needs shaping. Continuing making the body kit fit. We've mentioned it before, there are lots of problems, they don't fit, so it's just the making it all fit job, shaping the door, finishing shaping the door gaps, he's going to fit the side sills I think imminently, get on with that. These paint strippered, the roof, bonnet, doors, because they're original metal, the bonnet's getting louvered tomorrow. Once the paint stripping had been done, all the doors are being all the surfaces are being flatted. Any filler work needed being done there. There's not an awful lot though, to be honest. They're all fairly good. I think there's a bit needed in the doors, but a lot of the rest of it's pretty good. And then talking of shaping, I think you've seen one before, but we've now printed both the headlamp bezel units for the front of the car, for the dual projector headlamp units that are going in each side. We're using Hella projector headlamp units. And the bezels for those have been printed for both sides now, because basically this area of the wing on these body kits is completely nondescript. It could be for another car pretty much. So we're using the 3D prints from those, which have been modelled to what a Chevette headlight should look like. That side, the shape of that side of a headlight should look like, and then we can then shape the wing and make sure that the wing is going to fit to that unit. That's why we've 3D printed those because they will be machined in aluminium, but we've printed them for now so that we can use them as templates for the shape. So they're cracking on with that and getting all that sorted. Then in the background to all that, and tied into some other work as well, the batch of powder coating has come back from BG Pennies, the powder coaters that we use in Coventry, who do an amazingly good job. Big shout out for those. They're just absolutely superb to deal with. It's again one of the very few jobs we do send out, and they're absolutely faultless. I can't really sing their praises enough. They have blasted, zinc metal sprayed and gloss black powder coated all of the major set pieces of running gear for the Chevette. They've also done the same with the major pieces of running gear for the Mustang. You may recall we had the axle from Hauser Racing. Well, that last week went to BG Pennies. That's now back. So that's also ready for being built up. But we've got the axle ready to build up for this. We've just demasked that yesterday, I think, and all the suspension components are back, ready to be bushed up. So that's nice. Basically, we've got the majority of the components to get the car rolling now. We've also had a batch of plating returned from Coma Plating, that company we use for plating. Zinc nickel plating's back, so we've got all the major suspension fasteners now back from being zinc nickel plated for the Chevette, and also a few more parts for the Mustang. I think we've already got the majority of those, but we've got some more of those back. But we've got nearly all of the fasteners we need for the running gear on the Chevette as well in hand now. And also arriving, the engine from Paul Exon Race Engines for the Chevette, the 294, I'm correct, Jamie's correcting me, 294 horsepower, 2.3 litre C20XE Vauxhall red top engine on 52mm direct head throttle bodies. That's now arrived back. That is now in a position where we can do one or two little extraneous jobs, little dress-up type jobs, and fitting ancillary components to it. We've got to get some ancillaries, starter motor and alternator, I believe, from Wasp. We'll be getting those bolted on, getting that bolted onto the, it's a Quaife 60G transmission, getting that bolted to the transmission, so all that then can be assembled to the front cross member and the whole lot put in the car. Obviously that's not going to happen for a little while yet, because we're a long way back from that stage yet, but trying to run things in parallel, we're trying to get all of the sub-assemblies built in parallel with the body shell being worked on now. There's nothing to stop us getting an awful lot of work done so that it can all just be slotted, well, it's never that simple, but theoretically it can all just be slotted into the car once the car's all painted. So yeah, things are forging ahead quite well on that. And then while we're in the body shop area, I also know it was early in the week, Gaz was also flatting and polishing the final parts of the Mustang that he'd done some initial basically he flatted and polished the mating faces in areas that would be inaccessible once the panels were on the car, but it's quite difficult to flat and polish the panels when they're kind of floating around on a bench or hanging on a stand or whatever. They're not very wieldy to work on, so he's flatted and polished the areas that would be inaccessible or difficult once they're on the car. Then he's fitted those panels to the car, and then he's flatted and polished all the panels with them attached to the car, which is much easier. So that's sat in the paint booth, which is why I'm not looking at it at the minute, but that's sat in there now, all finished, flatted and polished, and that'll be going round for major mechanicals to be put in as soon as we've got space in the assembly shop, basically, which means we need another vehicle to be moved out of the assembly shop, which we're on the cusp of. So that's the next step forward on that. We are waiting for a few parts for that as well, which means it's kind of worked out quite well, really. There's a number of items we're waiting for, which we do need to do some of the final assemblies. A few items, engine-related items, and engine ancillaries basically, and some steering-related bits that we really want before we start assembling the car that we're waiting for from the States. So that's all sitting there quite nicely in a nice position. Ready to move forward as soon as we can. Ah yes, Jamie's just reminded me of a rather nice little piece actually, Chevette related, which I'd totally forgotten about. I can't remember whether we mentioned it before, we probably had, but there's on the transmission tunnel in the Chevette, there's a large surround where the shifter turret for the Quaife 60G gearbox protrudes, and we wanted to make a tidy job of some sort of surround for that could hold a gator, but also finish that area and be quite functional. And you may remember we were using a floor-mounted, using a Tilton floor-mounted pedal box in this car. And we need obviously a fluid feed for the master cylinders on that pedal box, hydraulic clutch and twin brake master cylinders on that. So we've James has designed a tank come bezel. It's basically a machined aluminium billet section that acts as a bezel for the gear gate, to hold the gear gaiter around the gear lever, finishes that section of the tunnel off with an RC radius piece, and then it also has a reservoir machined into the billet. It'll all be anodised black, and then it's going to have with an anodised top, which O-ring seals on. It's got a level sensor in it, and it's got the ports out to feed the master cylinders. So it's designed all that, but before we commit to getting it machined, we tend to like to do a print of particularly complex and expensive to machine items. We tend to do a print first just to make sure we haven't dropped a clanger anywhere, make sure it does all fit in the car and we haven't missed something silly, which is, to be fair, we rarely have, but it's often worth doing. So James has printed a mock-up of that centre console section, and I believe he's tried that in the car. I'm not actually sure, but I believe he's tried it in the car. I could see no reason it wouldn't work, so I hadn't actually noticed, but I imagine he's tried it in the car, and it should look, certainly from what I saw of it, it looks extremely nice. Well, yeah, so the next job, now we've verified that fits, is to, or James has verified that fits, is to send that job down, to send the step file for that down to Darren at Alitech, so that he can have a look at it and let us know how quickly he'll be able to get on and get it machined. It's in a long queue of bits awaiting machining, but he's doing a rather nice job of them. So yeah, that's all going well. I think that marathon rounds off this week at Retropower. So yeah, we'll see you again soon. Cal will see you next week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care.